Hi everyone, I think it's time to start. Sorry for the delays. Please take your seat. Okay, so can we start the recording, please? Yep. Okay, thanks. So, welcome everyone to the NCUC session today. It's an unusual format. We don't have really kind of like usual, I would say, Constituency Day. We have hopefully several newcomers with us, so our agenda will try to achieve two goals. Is first that if we will try to discuss several policy and non-policy topics, but also to give more introduction about what we are doing at NCUC and so on. So trying to do both. And also we will have a guest coming later. It's an opportunity for us to talk with a new board member. And at the end we will try to more kind of administrative matter and try to keep that as short as possible, as I know that many people are usually excited about those topics. First, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Rafiq Ramak. I'm the chair of the Noncommercial User Constituency. In my right, the Milton Muller, who is also the member of the executive committee from North America. So, as you can see, that's our agenda. In the beginning, we'll try to give more kind of short overview about NCUC and the activity, maybe some historical background. And for that I will give the floor to Milton. Yes, the first agenda item.
Hello. Are there any newcomers here? Okay, 2. All right. Any more? Yeah. 3. Great. Okay. So the Non-Commercial Users Constituency is part of what's called the Non-Commercial Stakeholders Group. And basically, when we were setting up ICANN, we had an issue of representation. We had to know if we're going to be making policies for the domain name system, who's going to be represented in making this policy. And that means you ended up dividing people into categories of stakeholder. And so they came up at first with a very crude and unbalanced categorization. And later they reformed it so that now we have a 4-part structure in which you have the contracted parties and the non-contracted parties. And within the non-contracted parties you have registries and registrars. And in the non-contracted parties, you have commercial and non-commercial stakeholders, and each of these stakeholder groups has a balanced representation on the GNSO Council, which is the body which manages the policy-making process. So what we do is fundamentally 2 things. We elect people, we participate in the policy process by generating statements and positions and participating in working groups. And then we elect people to positions within the GNSO, such as the GNSO Council, and we participate in the election of 2 board members from the domain name community onto the ICANN board. So we are directly involved in policy. It's not like the at-large advisory committee, which doesn't have a formal policy-making process, but advises on policies. We are making policy within the GNSO. In terms of our history, I think we have grown and strengthened recently in the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years. And we are now at the point where we can try to compete on a par with the other commercial stakeholder groups, which typically have a greater financial stake in domain names and therefore are able to support more permanent and professional kinds of participation in the process. We include people like activist groups, universities, and public interest groups. And a few years ago, we decided to allow individuals to join. And the individuals are basically people who either are not part of an organization, they're just acting on behalf of their own interests as an individual internet domain name registrant, or they might be part of an organization, a very large organization, let's say a big public university, and they cannot get that large organization to go to the trouble of joining NCUC and getting all the permissions and going up the hierarchy, so they simply join as an individual. And there's also there's people who are part of an organization, a non-commercial organization that is formally registered as an organization and is eligible to be in this constituency. The eligibility means that you're really, fundamentally just means that you're not a commercial actor in the domain name space and you're not part of some other constituency. We're trying to maintain a clear separation and absence of conflict of interest among the different stakeholder groups. So, for example, if you are a registry and you're a member of the registry stakeholder group, then you probably shouldn't be here because you're being represented over there. And if you're here, you're either confused or you're trying to infiltrate us or you're selling out your registry constituency because we might not have the same interest. So how's that for an introduction? Is that any questions? Does people have any questions about who we are, what we're doing?
Thanks, Milton. Any question? Don't be shy, guys.
Do we have an option to introduce the new members?
I'm sorry, can you just please state your name and your affiliation?
Yeah. I'm one of them. My name is Gangadhar Pandey. I am the founder of a non-profit organization, Bobble Film Society. We spread awareness about environmental issues using internet. And we are based out of Hyderabad. No. The other members, new members, 3 people were there. No? If they are also introduced, that would be great.
Great. Introductions from the new people.
Yes, Niels.
This is Arshad. I'm currently pursuing my undergraduate degree here at Hyderabad.
I'm Ramya. I'm also currently pursuing my undergraduation here in Hyderabad.
Hello everyone, this is Haoran from China, a postgraduate student majoring in the IG issue, and I have already applied for joining NCUC. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Niels.
Thank you very much, Rafik. This is Niels de Noever from Article 19. I had a question for Mr. Muller, and that is something I only found out recently, is that quite a lot of people within NCUC are also member of at large. So it is possible to be member of different constituencies, even though some are mutually exclusive, some are not. Could you elaborate a bit more on that to create a bit more understanding and remove some confusion on that?
Yes, always a source of confusion. So the at-large is not actually a constituency. It's a advisory committee which is elected by at-large organizations at the regional level. And each of these regional at-large organizations is composed of individual organizations called at-large structures, which is kind of a weird terminology. But the main point is that the at-large is not the GNSO. So the GNSO is in charge of domain name policy. At large can join working groups. They can offer advice about the domain name policies, but they don't actually elect people onto the council. They don't participate directly in the domain name policy making process the same way we do. So there's no necessary conflict of interest between being an at-large member. You're really you're adding to your interests and responsibilities by, being part of a bigger part of the ICANN system. Of course, the conflict is if you're in another GNSO constituency where we are trying to balance the representation across the stakeholder groups. Now, if at-large is not entirely non-commercial, its rationale or its raison d'etre is the, quote, individual internet user, which could be a commercial internet user, it could be a non-commercial. It doesn't matter to at-large, and of course it does matter to us. So I hope that's clear. So there's nothing stopping anybody who has too much time on their hands from going and joining both at-large and the NCUC.
Okay, thanks, Milton. Time is a scarce resource anyway. I hope that it's becoming more clear. I guess for many newcomers that there are so many acronyms and how ICANN is structured can be really confusing. But the basic thing that we are as NCUC, constituency representing civil society, non-for-profit, academia, and so on, and also the individuals, non-commercial individuals within the ICANN ecosystem. And so we focus a lot on the policy making processes. So that's why in the next agenda item we are trying to go through several topics. And the idea here is really to get the briefing, to explain what's going on, and after that to see what as NCUC we can do there, what is expected from us. So it's a good opportunity to catch up about the ongoing policy, and so feel free to ask questions. So we will have several briefing, and I see that Avri is here already. So we can start with the new GTLD subsequent procedure working group. Avri, you are one of the co-chair of the working group, and so we are happy that you are here, that you can give us an update, what's going on, what kind of issues that rise there. Is kind of to give a briefing and then maybe to clarify with us what we can do.
Sure thing. Thanks. So I didn't introduce myself because I came late. But I'm Avri Doria. I am a member of NCSG. I'm a member of NCUC.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Okay. I thought I was. Okay. So, the new GTLD subsequent procedures. Basically, we've had and we're still going on with the current new GTLD process. But what was stipulated in that process was that before going on with subsequent procedures, future rounds, what have you, we would do a complete review of the policies and the implementation that had been done. So the policy had been done in 2007, approved, and then the implementation began in 2012. So we are going through everything that was part of that policy and was part of the implementation. Any of you that know about the implementation have heard the application guidebook or AGB reference, which is where a very long, complicated document that defined everything to do with the new GTLDs. Well, not everything, because anybody that paid attention also knows that it wasn't quite as predictable as it should be, and so there were bunches of changes made to the implementation as it goes on. So now the basis that we start from is there is a policy, there is an implementation, we can change any of it, but anything we don't come up with a consensus to change remains as it was. So that's the basis. We're not starting out with a blank sheet of paper to define a process for new GTLDs. We're fixing the one that we've got. So we are going through just about everything. We had a call, community comments call 1, acronymed CC1. We had this community comments 1 that was sent out to all of the stakeholder groups, all of the advisory committees, all of the supporting organizations, all of the constituencies, and we got some answers. Unfortunately, none of the non-commercial entities, whether NCSG, NCUC, or MPOC, submitted an answer, though NCUC, or maybe it was NCSG, did work on one, but it never quite answered the questions that were in the CC1. So we are still going through that. There's the first opportunity for people to get involved. We have a group. We meet periodically every 2 weeks. And now we're going through all of the responses in this CC1 review. So that means that any of the non-commercials that want to participate. And there we asked, it was a set of questions like, do we need more GTLDs? Do we need subsequent rounds at all? If we do have more GTLDs, do we do them in rounds, or do we want to get into a first come, first serve? And what are the complexities of doing that if we do it? Is there any limit to the number of TLDs either in a round or that any individual can apply for? And basically very overarching questions that we were asking. Flexibility. The number one principle of the previous round had been this needs to be a predictable process. Well, we have found that the need to adjust things had made certain changes, so it didn't end up being very predictable for a lot of people. So now we're trying to weigh what's the balance between predictability and flexibility, because things are learned along the way and you need to change. So is there a balance there, and how does that preference get made? Okay, so that's part of it. Now there are at least, I think, 68 different issues that we're going through, and I won't try to enumerate them, partly because I'm not staring at a cheat sheet to remember all of them, but also because of the time, that we have divided into 4 sub-teams. We have a sub-team that's looking at the application procedure, things like applicant support for developing economies, basically looking at all the details of the application process. We have one that's looking at the legal and regulatory issues that came up. We have one that is looking at all the contention issues and the objection processes that were formed. And then we have one that's looking at issues like IDNs, issues like name collision and such. So these are 4 fairly intense groups. They've just started their work. So anybody that wants to get into one of these won't have a lot of catch up to do, won't have missed a lot. In January, we will be putting out Community Comment 2, CC2, where we will be again coming to NCSG, NCUC, MPOC, and all the other SOs and ACs asking a set of specific questions. These questions basically come up in the discussions we're having now. Some things hit consensus quite quickly, and we may not have a question to ask. But if in the process of conversations we see that there's a divergence of views, those are the things we'll create questions around and send them to all of the organizational entities within ICANN to get opinions. So therefore, if you have an issue, now is one of the times to start participating so that you can make sure that the issue you've got gets generated into one of those questions. Then basically we'll get these things optimistically. So we come out with this in January. Optimistically, we come out with our first, our draft recommendations in October of 17, at which point there'll be another review that will be requesting specific answers from, the constituencies, the stakeholder groups, the supporting organizations, and the advisory committees. And then from there we'll be trying to finalize a report. Now the way we're tending, just to give you some idea, and I've probably already gone too long, so I'll stop soon, is For example, we're coming up with a hybrid notion on the question of, is this another round? Are we doing first come, first serve? We think there are possibly scalability problems. We've heard claims that there are tens of thousands of new names that people want to apply for next. I have trouble understanding that, but those that seem to know more about demand tell me that, there's a demand for 10,000 new names. Many of them may be brands. Oh yeah, another one of the questions we asked is, are there different kinds of categories? Brands, communities, regulated industries, etc. And do these get special sort of application procedures? Do these have special sorts of contracts, etc.? So there's a great number of questions that we go into, and I could go further into some of the questions. So in terms of what we need from NCUC, what we need from you all is contribution, is people participating in these groups and asking questions, contributing viewpoints, getting into discussions. We also, when it comes time for the next community comment, we need people that write down comments, that write down things, and that review them in edits. We only need 1 or 2 editors for every document, but then again, we need lots of people to read them, to comment, to agree and disagree. So there's more than enough opportunity, and because of the number of different issues, whether it's the way they're charged for, the way applicants are supported from developing economies, the so-called rights protection mechanisms, etc. All of those things need specialists, need people that care about those as topics. And if anybody specifically wants to know, is my topic of interest included? The answer is probably yes, but if you talk to me, I'll give you specific pointers as to where you could find that being discussed. Hopefully that was a brief enough overview. Too brief, too long, what have you. I'll be quiet.
Thanks, Harvey. It's complicated. I mean, it's hard to be brief about a complicated or complex issue. But maybe just to check, how many here are aware or familiar with the new GTLD program? Okay, looks okay. So we are assuming that the case, Avery. So it's because you give really many details, but that's the point. It's a review process about what happened, I think 4 years ago, and all the issues that raised at that time. So, yeah.
Just to jump on that one, there are others that are doing review processes. The CCT, the RPM reviews. The only things that we're reviewing are their outputs and anything they don't review. So we're not specifically a review, we're a revise. But of course you don't revise without doing review first. But our primary purpose is to revise as needed.
Okay, so maybe so first question from me. So you mean that one of the outcome of the working group is maybe to revise the applicant guidebook?
Absolutely. And as I was asked the other night, can I tell people whether the application guidebook criteria will be the same? And basically, at this point, it is impossible to tell what we will change and what we won't change. But for sure, everything will be looked at, everything can be changed.
Okay, so we can assume there is opportunity really to get involved and to contribute, in particular for those who just joined. Yes, Stephanie.
Oh, that's no problem. Stephanie Perrin for the record. And I appreciate we're trying to stick to agenda here, Rafiq, so I trust you will tell me this is way too broad a question and discussion to open up if that is the case. But I'm thinking how our various initiatives come together in some of these working groups. So, for instance, on the matter of the revision of the applicant guidebook, I'm presuming that we would like to have a human rights impact assessment put into that process. I'm concerned about policy development getting fragmented across the entire organization. I don't have a view on this. I'm just thinking it through. I can see where we could easily have a human rights impact assessment as part of the applicant guidebook to make sure that nothing that is going into the proposals for these domain names has an impact that we're unhappy about. I'm just wondering how we would review that from a policy perspective, because we just had a presentation in our meeting with the board about this sort of gray regulation or shadow regulation that's creeping in, and we don't want voluntary practices or PICs to do something that should have some kind of review. And I think we need to reinforce the GNSO as the policy central. So, any thoughts on that?
You sure go ahead. It's not for me. It's for the master of ceremony.
I think it's an excellent suggestion from Stephanie, and I would really like to hear also from Avery, because from Avery, and I have to give credit where credit's due, I learned that there is already the possibility to get a rights impact assessment during the preliminary issue report that can be triggered, but as far as I know, that has never been triggered. So would this potentially be a moment where we could do that? And
okay, let me start with yeses and nos and maybes. First of all, we're way past the issue report. The issue report occurred sometime earlier in the year before this new GTLD PDP was initiated. So we did have an opportunity then. A fair amount of noise was made about the fact that we should do one, but we didn't. But that's beside the point. I see absolutely no reason why, especially if groundwork is laid for it, why when the initial report comes out would be an appropriate time. Just because that never got formalized. The initial report is basically, this is what we think the recommendation is. That would be an excellent time for one to occur. Now, how we would get that to happen formally, certainly we could generate one informally on our own. But how we would get the GNSO, for example, to impose one on it would probably require a fair amount of work, since the only time, and we've got counselors, and that can become a counselor mission in terms of saying when something this large comes out, that it's not only at issue report time that we should do it. Yeah. Issue report is kind of almost the wrong time. It's all we could get up to now, because here's things you might want to think about. Whereas at initial report, we've got until October 17 before we come out with our initial recommendations. So therefore there is about a year to somehow get that staged so it could happen. Now, in terms of the other issues that you brought up, a lot of them will occur in places. Now, I want to differentiate between things that registries do voluntarily and PICs. PICs will definitely be an issue of discussion, even though they're one of the things that were not in the application guidebook, were not in the policy, but were added subsequently. So we will definitely be reviewing PICs and what it means to have PICs and et cetera. Now, the other issue that's become interesting in the last couple weeks and months that has to do with registries, private agreements, and private concerns of how they will run their registry is a different issue. And I don't know that we'll be getting into that one, because that would be sort of going one level down in terms of what may a registry do as an individual business. So that one isn't on the table at the moment. PICs are on the table, but not an individual action by a registry that is in an area that ICANN does not control. So if ICANN does not make rules about content, then we are in a strange position of saying, and therefore registries may not make their own agreements about content, because that would be us making a rule about content. So that is a different issue. That one isn't necessarily on the table yet. Doesn't mean that it can't be put on the table, but it isn't part of the program.
Okay, thanks, Avery. Maybe just for those who don't know, the PICs stand for public interest commitments.
So I apologize. I try to be good. I apologize.
You were good. Don't worry. Just because also I really encourage the newcomers here to feel free to ask question and clarification. The main point here is really to give briefing and to urge people to get involved. So it's a way to catch up what's happening. I have Milton in the queue and then Niels. Yes, Milton.
So I think Avery touched on one of the issues I have, which is, okay, we're revising the applicant guidebook. We're trying to decide what the policy is, what we're going to change, and what we're going to keep the same as we go forward. But there's all these things that were added that were not part of the applicant guidebook in the last minute of the pass process. And essentially, I think most of that came from the GAC. Would you agree, Avery, that most of these things came from either the trademark owners trying to add additional protections or the GAC introducing so-called public policy objectives in?
I haven't done a counting, but I would say as much came from trademark, GAC, and perhaps some from ALAC as well, but yeah.
ALAC, GAC, okay. So, I think that is one of the biggest problems. I mean, I would like to take like a vacuum cleaner to the applicant guidebook and just suck out all of the junk, the cobwebs, the clutter, and if you recall, when we were actually making a new TLD policy in the GNSO, we came up with some basic principles, like 6 or 7 of them, one of which was, it should be predictable. Right. You should know when you spend $200,000 to apply that this application is meeting the guidelines or not. It should be pretty clear. And then they kept changing the rules, moving the goalposts. Do you think, those of you who are more plugged into the process, that this is going to happen again? And does it make sense to invest a lot of time and effort into revising this applicant guidebook when once people start applying, all bets are off?
Should I reply? That's part of, this is Aubrey speaking again, that's part of the discussion of predictability versus flexibility. Indeed, so we're trying to sort of set that. There's very strong push from those that are past applicants and future applicants that this not happen again. Those things that happened before, I unfortunately do not think we get to do a vacuum cleaner and remove them, but we do get to discuss each of them in relation to the policy and decide whether we wish to apply policy that makes them viable, and if so, what that policy is. So those things are the existing base. They can be changed if there's discussion and if there's policy consensus to change them, but we'd have to go through the discussions. Now, will it happen again? I think that while I'd like to say absolutely no way, I think for sure it will. But that doesn't mean that we can't require that any of those changes go through a consensus policy. So, we can look at the fact that changes may be required, some flexibility may be required, but when can it occur? How can it occur? What are the constraints on it occurring? Does it require a community review? Does it require a GNSO, emergency PDP or one of the other constructs that we have within the GNSO for making changes to policy? I think that we can hopefully, and another thing that's different now than was on the last one is we now have the possibility of creating a implementation review team that as the future application guidebook is being edited and revised, that we can have an implementation review team commonly acronymed IRP, but to basically comment on that and to have something to say about it. I don't know if that answers satisfactorily, but yeah.
I guess if I could jump in with a similar question, it's just how long do you see this playing out? Is this something where we need to be ready with specific positions in the next 6 months, or is this going to drag out?
Yeah. In other words, we need to start getting our positions ready to start putting them into the mix early. The later you put a position in, the more you're combating existing consensus. Not that people don't do it. And yes, it is going to drag out for a long time.
Okay, thanks, Avery. We have Q. We have lady here, and then Niels, and then Stephanie. Yeah, please.
Morning, everyone. My name is Liz Orembo from Kenya, a next-gen ambassador, and I'm fairly new into these processes, but not for long. I hope so. My question is, we have two parallel reviews going on, the RPM and then now the revision that you're mentioning. And I'm wondering how these processes go, because why should they be parallel? Because that's like double work, because it forces you to observe into this other working group and then to work on this other one, and there's no much time. So can one feed into the other so that one waits for one process wait, and then maybe this one feeds into the RPM or RPM vice versa, something like that?
Thanks. Welcome. Really good question. Yeah, you won't be new for long. We are coordinating between the various PDP working groups. We have meetings, we have schedules that indicate that this feeds into there. So anything that's being worked on in one of those other areas, the CCT or the RPM and such, we are not really touching. We basically have a blank that says their report. So when we get their draft report, we'll start fitting in the draft report into the work we're doing. We'll look at the draft report, we'll see what they've done, we'll see how it matches, we'll see if there's stuff that's missing that we now need to work on because they didn't do it. So the thing that was a concern is if we waited for them to finish, which is another year and a half, and only then did we start, it wouldn't be 2018 or 20 when we saw the new programs. It would be much further down the line. And you'll find within this community, there are people that say, I'm happy with the application guidebook the way it is now, and I think we should just start new rounds now. Don't worry about it. Just keep going. And we have people at the other end of the scale that says, there's more than enough GTLDs. If another one was never created, that would be just fine. We don't need any more program. So we're really trying to balance, but we've got a very complicated schedule where, like a big engineering project very much, where you do have a lot of parallel work going on, and you try to schedule various integration points for those various things so that you can work in parallel but not repeat yourself a lot. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Avery.
Can I just jump in, Stephanie Perrin? You might find it useful to check the GNSO Council project list, because that has all the different projects. And we get regular updates at meetings like this on what's happening in these so that we can keep informed and cross-fertilize.
Okay, thanks. Niels?
Yeah, thanks for the excellent suggestion you made, Avery, on the human rights impact assessment and how we could do that. I would therefore to try to operationalize this, like to go to see how we can make this happen with our counselors, to make the next steps on this, to ensure that this is not a beautiful idea that gets lost in the grass. So maybe our counselors or Avery could give some hints on how we could do that.
For me at the moment, it's lost in the grass. But I don't actually know. I'd have to think about whether there was a place where we fit it in, but I really think it is much more an initiative that would need to come from the counselors. Now, maybe you have your own human rights group that does recommendations of things, your human rights working party, whatever thingy. And that may be a place where the idea could start to have an origin, could become a proposal that then got sent into the council, that for not just what we're talking about, but, if I'm stepping back now from being the person talking about subsequent procedures and just a person participating, I don't see why you wouldn't want that on every initial report, not just this one. And that would make it much easier as a generic process point. It's nice that we do them at that, but given the new bylaws and given the new, mandates and given the new board concern with human rights and the fact that when we send them, because this is one of the things that came out in that meeting, if I can digress just 1 minute, is one of the things that came out in that meeting is the board said, it's not for us to do this human rights impact assessment. It's for the GNSO to do it. So they've already given the go-ahead to GNSO to say, now I think it's for the board to then look at the recommendation that comes from the GNSO and say, wait a second, where is the human rights impact assessment? So I think that it's in that space that the opportunity has already been opened up for us to start putting a proposal into the GNSO. And if it originated in your working party, with some structure, with some flesh, that might be a way to go about it. And that was totally off the top of my head trying to answer the question.
Can I jump in, Stephanie Perrin? I think we had this discussion a while ago. I thought you guys actually were developing some kind of a template human rights impact assessment. Once you get in your cross-community working party something that has reasonable consensus, then we can take that draft to council. Because, as I said earlier, I want to hang on to policy making at the council level. And then we can take that and figure out where it applies across the community. But once council endorses it, and then we need to figure out exactly where we want it in each of the processes and procedures. I would argue that just as we need it in the applicant guidebook, so that when they're assessing the applications, there's already a human rights impact assessment included in that application. We also need it in the GNSO structure in terms of the chartering for the groups. We need to figure out whether, because otherwise we wind up in the actual PDPs with human rights being out of scope for that particular activity. So if we don't get it in early so that it's included in the charter, we will be running a PDP that is considered to be purely implementation, purely technical.
I want to ask a clarifying question, Zafri, again. So you did not want a human rights assessment just of the subsequent procedures. You actually want a human rights assessment of every application?
I do.
Oh, yeah.
May I just clarify that last clarification? Apologies to non-English speakers.
Stephanie, sorry, please, let's try to be in the queue so to have everyone involved. But please be brief, and then I think Milton and Niels want to respond.
Clearly one of the hardest things to craft when you're coming up with a human rights impact assessment and a procedure that holds it is the scope. Most of those applications, I hope, will not have to have a human rights impact assessment. It's only if it applies. And that's like a pre-screening.
I just wanted to call out, there's a document in which I guess, is it the Global Domains Division? Somebody has put together like the principles that we adopted for the new TLD program a long time ago. And then they have a spreadsheet that says policy satisfactory, yes, no, implementation satisfactory, policy adjustments, clarifications, implementation guidance, and other considerations. Avri, do you know the status of this document? It's actually a very good starting point for looking at where we might want to intervene in this process.
No, I don't know. I'd have to check.
Okay, I'll send it as an attachment to the NCUC list if people want me to.
Niels?
I might be jumping ahead to point 22B and happy for people to refer it there. But my question would be, process-wise, would it be the best way to address this issue in workstream 2 in the human rights subgroup, or bring it up through council? Because we probably not only want it for the GNSO, but probably also for the ASO and the CCNSO, or not, or.
If I can answer quickly, how does it fit into a framework of interpretation? It would be your answer for WS2. If it's part of a framework of interpretation, you probably can. Otherwise, I had no idea how.
Well, as part of and now it gets a bit detailed. So as part of the transition, there was the cross-community working group on enhancing ICANN accountability. That proposal had several annexes. Annex 6 was about human rights, and that annex also gives us a certain work for workstream 2. And one of those questions that's being asked there is, what are policy and procedure changes that living up to the human rights commitment would look like? So the question would be, we do not want duplication, right? So why is it, what would be the right place to do it? Would it be to go through council, or would it be through there, or would these be two processes that we could do in parallel?
Okay, thank Niels. Okay, just maybe kind of administrative point here. We will have kind of, not really break, but at noon 1:05 for lunch. And we are asking people to come back here. So we give details about that later on. And so I am thinking that we should move to another topic. So, but please, let's make last comments and let's move on to the registration directory services. So, yes, Stephanie.
Stephanie Perrin, for the record. I originally raised my hand to raise the point that we brought up yesterday in I forget which meeting. These issues of shadow regulation are extremely important and complicated, and if we are going to opine on shadow regulation as we did in the previous meeting with the board, and I totally agree, we do not want to get into content. However, we want to get into human rights assessment. That's perilously close to content. We have a window over the next year to make sure we all understand exactly the knife edge that we're walking, and make sure that we have our arguments and our critical theory and analysis all lined up. And I don't think it's a trivial matter. So I would suggest that we come up with a little working group that is going to have some sustained action on this. Otherwise, we'll be contradicting each other in different PDPs and working groups. My second point is, and I'm often told that my government analogies have nothing to do with ICANN, and I beg to differ and will continue to beg to differ. What we need here is the equivalent of a regulatory impact assessment at the beginning as a kind of a screening mechanism to determine whether the human rights impact assessment is required. And where that fits in the ICANN ecosystem is a non-trivial question. But I would encourage everybody to think about this, because the parallel to drafting legislation and putting material into a cabinet is a very strong one, and there are procedures that have been developed that we can analogize here in ICANN, because we are doing public policy. and particularly as we start applying human rights. It's non-theoretical. It has to be right down to the nuts and bolts of what we're agreeing to when we pass these things. Thank you.
Thanks. I assume there is no further comment on this topic? No. Okay, so let's move on to the next item. Kat is not here, so I cannot really talk about the rights protection mechanism. So let's move to the registration directory services, and would ask Stephanie here. Stephanie. So we are going to talk about the RDS. So please just, let's say, give a short briefing what's going on and what NCUC should do there. Short briefing. I insist about that.
Well, I would encourage people to come to the RDS meetings and join the working group. We are in a 5-year project. We're basically revising everything that has to do with registration data, and there are many very difficult issues arising. That's short.
Okay. Yes, David.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, I'm part of the leadership team of that effort. I'm one of the vice chairs of the working group, which does tend to mean I take worry more about the procedural aspects, and while Stephanie leads the charge on the policy. This is a very long working group, but we absolutely do anticipate that people will jump in and out at different stages, as it's, a complicated process that will involve a lot of different things. So don't feel that you can get involved now, and it does not mean that we expect you to sign up for a multi-year process. Where we are right now, we've spent 9 months on this working group, essentially ensuring that we have at least, hopefully all, but at least most of the major documents that we are going to need as input. We're basically, this working group is to replace, technically to assess. We're in phase 1, where we're assessing if we are need to replace WHOIS as the major source of registrant data. Then phase 2 will be what we should replace it with, or how we should change it to ensure it's up to date. We've spent 9 months ensuring that we're collecting data, ensuring that we understand what the purpose of the effort is, putting our work plan into place and things like that. This week we have already started deliberation on the requirements for a new WHOIS, or a new registration data services. This isn't, if you want to jump into the interesting policy debates, this is a good time. You've skipped a lot of procedural work. It's really starting to be an interesting debate. You'll learn a lot about privacy and privacy considerations at ICANN, and how the WHOIS works, and all the different things people use the DNS and WHOIS data for. I'd encourage, if you have any interest in privacy at ICANN, this is a really good working group to get involved with and join. Even just following the debate now will certainly help give you a lot of useful perspective for when we get into the many detailed issues about this over the next few years. So I'd really encourage everyone to join, and also say that this is a vital one for privacy rights at ICANN. There are a lot of really strong interests, both from law enforcement and intellectual property constituents, who have very different views on privacy than a lot of non-commercial organisations. And they really are outnumbering us here. So if you're interested in privacy and you want to work towards privacy in the domain name system, we could really use you in this one. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Aiden?
Thanks, Rafiq. I just wanted to add, expand upon that just slightly. So, as Bush has mentioned, as of our most recent meeting here in Hyderabad, we've started to deliberate on these possible requirements. I wasn't in that session. I had a conflict. But just to give some background, to aid in the deliberation of these possible requirements, the working group also agreed upon, and NCUC members were instrumental in crafting a concise problem statement. And we also reviewed a number of example use cases and explored real-world scenarios to understand how the RDS is used today, along with what we would think the new system should look like, taking into account how it is already used. Should it be determined that a replacement system is required? So I just wanted to provide that for you.
Thanks. Any question here? Any comment? Okay. So we have 50 minutes left. Okay, so we may start another topic for discussion, but then we will maybe be cut for the lunch. I heard that getting food is human rights, so we cannot prevent people from going to do that. So what I'm thinking is really that maybe Rob, you can give some details about the lunch. Yeah.
Good afternoon. This is Rob Hogarth. The details are very simple. There's lunch outside, just out this door to the left, then out the glass doors to the right about 10 meters. You've got the closest meeting room to lunch of anyone at the meeting. And it's going to be available from 12:15 until 13:45. So for an hour and a half. I guess so, yes.
Okay, wait, it's what you are doing. So, thanks, Rob. So what we are trying to do is, we'll ask you can, from 12:50 that you can get lunch and hopefully try to come back. So maybe you try to have a working lunch if it's possible. Or at least you get 30 minutes to get fit and come back. Since we have still to go through other topics for discussion and we have guests. So, in meantime, still the lunch is not going to start. We have 10 minutes. Maybe you can start discussion about maybe starting with human rights. Niels? Yeah.
So luckily there are several other people here who are active within this subgroup. So if I forget something, please feel free to add on. So let me put on my rapporteur's hat for the cross-community working group workstream 2 subgroup on human rights. We have, and we can, I think, be quite happy about that, a really big group of interested people and a good discussion on the list. I think there was quite a lot of fear that workstream 2 would kind of be the graveyard of issues of the transition, but thus far we've indeed seen a bit less activity on the lists overall than during workstream 1, but it definitely has not grinded to a halt and we're making progress. So what we've been doing in the human rights subgroup is that we first started off to create a level playing field, to ensure that people who wanted to join did not feel alienated because this group of people had already discussed so much before and did not and felt left out. You can often feel left out in ICANN because there is this thing that anthropologists called argot, And it's a boundary language, right? But because people use all these acronyms, it's clearly to show who is in and who is out. So we wanted to ensure that that was not there. So we created a document which completely documented the discussions and the decisions that were made during a workstream 1 on human rights. We got consensus, we got approved on that, so we have that. So that was a good first step. Then we started looking at what could we do to develop this framework of interpretation for the ICANN bylaw on human rights, which is needed to actually operationalize it. That's what the bylaw says. So we looked at different models that are there, and as you all know, there are a number of international human rights treaties, but they are only applicable to states. So there have been ways to get companies in the corporate accountability movement. There have been different ways to also have non-state actors be accountable for human rights. The first work on that was the UN Global Compact, which introduced the concept of corporate social responsibility, but that was still very vague. And with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which were authored by John Ruggie, we got a much more stringent framework, which is now adopted by over 200 companies. There's an implementation guide for the ICT sector. There are extra guidelines from the OECD. So it really provides much more framework. But ICANN is not your average company, right? So we have been looking together with the whole subgroup through the Ruggie principles to see what could and what could not be relevant for ICANN and learn from that and see what could work. So based on that, we agreed on a drafting team, who are a bit the pioneers of the group, who are piecing things together and who have been producing different documents that we are now discussing on weekly calls. So we really boarded off that the framework of interpretation that we're developing is not a framework of implementation. What we should do is stay very close to our mandate, and that's explain the bylaw. That's it. So, and that's what we're doing. We're progressing, and it is by all means expected that we will achieve the milestones that are set. That means by January, February, we expect to have a consensus document in our subgroup, and then we will hand it off to the cross-community working group itself for consensus, and after that it will go for public comment, which will then open up for the whole community to comment on it, and eventually ending the process in June, and then we will happily carry on with the next steps. Did I forget anything? I will first want to look to the active members of the subgroup. Did I forget anything? No, so any questions, comments, suggestions would be extremely welcome.
Okay, it's not easy to moderate silence, but okay, so okay, let's maybe stop here, I guess, if there is no question, and come back in 30 minutes, 30, 45. I'm trying to make to bargain in with you guys. Yes, Niels.
It's great that there are no questions, but if we have a bit of time, Kathy is coming in. I think it would be, I understood that there were people who had questions or concerns about the UN guiding principles and their relevance or application. I think it would be great if we could use face-to-face time to discuss them. This could be a moment to do it.
Okay, what I can suggest, we have the room till 3 p.m. and we still will reconvene later. So if people want, then just you go bring your lunch here and maybe having this kind of ad hoc meeting as working lunch. Just a suggestion, Robin. So, what do you think? Yeah, for others, Milton. I will. Okay. Niels was suggesting that this discussion about the Ruggie principle and so on, if you want to have kind of face-to-face meeting and to take the opportunity to do so.
Okay, well, we have had a discussion about the the Ruggie principles. I think we're in one of these slippery areas, similar to what Aubrey was talking about with the PICs in the new TLD program, which is the relationship between public and private action and what it is we're trying to do with these human rights guidelines. To me, as I said in the session with the board, it's all about the policies. We want ICANN to be subjected to constraints about the policies they pass that would subject them to a human rights test. So it would be kind of like a constitutional limit on what ICANN could do with its policies. If they passed a policy that somehow violated the right to privacy or freedom of expression, then we would say, no, you can't do that. You have to change the policy. Other people see it as focusing more on the operations, either of ICANN, the organization, or its contracting parties and business partners. To me, this threatens diverting our attention from where the real action should be, the area where we can do something. However, I do recognize that within ICANN there are some issues, such as the one Niels raised with me last night, about like whistleblowing or due process for employees who do whistleblowing, which we might apply this sort of Ruggie principles. So to me, I don't want to have a debate about the Ruggie principles. I want to have a debate about the best way to subject ICANN's policies to human rights constraints. If the Ruggie principles helps that, great. If it detracts from it, then I'm against it. That's what I'm concerned.
Okay, Niels, you want to respond? And I think also Monica want to intervene. Yeah, Niels?
No, I'm happy to say that I can almost wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Muller here. I think the Ruggie principles are something we should look at. No, I don't think that. I'm not sure where their conception comes from that we should only look at operations or only at the policies. I think it's not necessarily useful to make that distinction at this point, because part of the operations are consequences of the policy, are consequences of policies. There are parts of operations on which there have no policies been made, as for instance the possibility for due process. Because as you all know, the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights have 3 pillars. The obligation for states to protect human rights, the obligation for non-state actors to respect human rights, and the third is the mitigation and remedy pillar. So if you look at remedy, then indeed the ombudsman, whistleblowing practices, etc., are all part of that. So for us, we understand that the internet is mediating more and more of our lives. So which means that the internet has an increasing impact on our rights. And we should understand which parts of the internet infrastructure does impact our rights. It's our right to privacy, freedom of expression, but also political participation, freedom of association, right to non-discrimination. And we should understand how ICANN impacts these rights. And for these, human rights impact assessments is what we need. And that's currently what we're discussing, and why we are looking at the Ruggie principles is that it's the only model we have to look at non-state actors. So it is a site for learning. It's not we need to subscribe, we need to become a Ruggie fans or Ruggie disciples. No, it's just it's a model that's very well documented, on which there's a lot of consensus, which could form a ground of inspiration for our work.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, Niels. Monica?
Monica Jolnerude for the record. So I think that generally we're all in agreement, aren't we? It's just the problem that for the non-state actors such as ICANN, which is enacting global policies, there are no international law treaties as such to directly be applied to it. And then we look for other instruments that could articulate these human rights obligations in the context of private actors that might be useful for us. So I think there are these two levels which should not be mixed up. And like Kathy pointed out on our chat, indeed, we should look to international obligations of states, but how does it in fact help us when we sit here and we try to find constraints on the policies adopted by ICANN? I think we need to focus on both. And that's why we need to address both the states as they participate within ICANN with the international obligations as they bear them because they're governments and they're states. But as well, we need to focus on the obligations, direct obligations of ICANN as such, as a private policy maker. So there are two ways we need to work. One is perhaps to modify the international law as such, which is a long, long project to cover private actors and businesses and policymakers and associations that are actually enacting global norms. But at the same time, we need to try to modify the private sphere itself, which is ICANN. And because they are complementary, none of them would be fully addressing these gaps that we're trying to cover. So that's my opinion. I think that they are complementary and they should be seen as such. Thank you.
Okay, Kathy Kleiman. Apologies for being late. I was listening to the registrars and registries talk to the board, and I'll fill you in. There's some interesting stuff from our perspective. I think we're in a moment. I mean, we're post-transition. We are in a moment where, after yelling for 18 years about freedom of expression, about freedom of association, about privacy, about data protection, we might be able to codify something, guys. We might be able to bring it in. And so I don't want to give up the moment. There's somewhat of a clash of cultures coming in here, of course. The human rights people, but Milton and I come from the public interest area. We monitor in the United States, we're both telecom people in the United States, and the United States Federal Communications Commission governs the spectrum of the United States, domestic spectrum. According to law that was passed in 1936, Milton, is that right? The Telecommunications Act, in the public interest, convenience, and necessity. And we've got over 70 years of case law on what public interest is. And about applying public interest principles to telecommunications and now being extended to the internet. So one of the things we're asking is what principles from the human rights apply here. And we have this problem because we have a model. This is not your ordinary corporation. This is an organization enacting global norms. This is acting like a state actor, and we've given it that. So I think it would be fair. I mean, there's no other, we're not getting our powers from any other treaties, so why not ask this organization to operate according to the human rights standards that protect human rights, what you said was a state obligation, not just respect human rights, which is a corporate obligation. We're somewhere in that shade in between, but I'd like us to enact global norms that protect human rights. And I'd like to find out what we can do now in this magic moment post-transition that helps us identify what human rights we consider or what public interest principles we consider the highest. And I think your paper did it marvelously, Monica. Again, you highlighted the paper with Thomas Schneider, freedom of expression, freedom of association, non-discrimination, data protection, and privacy. How do we codify those? How do we use materials to codify those and bring them to the forefront of ICANN's attention? The operational stuff, I have to argue policy. That's what I do every day in this organization. What can I bring to bear that says this is some guidance for ICANN as it enacts these global norms? I don't know if that makes sense. I haven't been sleeping much, but does that make some sense?
Monica, for the record, I'm not entirely sure that I follow you completely because ICANN perhaps would not be enacting any global human rights norms as such as you were sort of saying. So you're saying it establishes de facto standards on global level. That's what you're trying to say. Like
no,
Facebook, for example.
we do a policy through contract.
Yes.
And every GTLD registrant in the world.
Yes, that I understand.
And we establish these global norms. Mm-hmm. And if we don't do it protecting our highest core values.
I do follow now, but I wouldn't say that this is enacting global human rights norms as such. This is maybe what you were trying to say, because these norms are already codified. We don't need to invent the wheel again, yeah? We just need to make them applicable to ICANN. But I think that precisely what has been, tried here with all this Human Rights Working Party, and by trying to map, in fact, there are way more relevant human rights norms that not just the several few that we most often cite, such as freedom of expression or data protection. There's also due process, as you know very well, and there are many other relevant issues that are there, and I think a lot of work has been done by the Cross-Community Working Party trying to map and make it look visual and accessible. So I'm not sure that we disagree on something. I think that we sort of agree generally that we need constraints on ICANN's actions and especially policy making. But the problem is that we cannot, or in fact we just encounter a great resistance from ICANN as such by saying that you should protect human rights because this is the duty of the states. So they would say no. Then we need to find some alternatives. Then we try to propose, okay, then you have to respect human rights as a private actor. Before the international law would be extended and modified to actually make private bodies directly, liable for human rights violations, which is not the case now. So Ruggie Principles, in fact, is just like a failure of a binding international treaty, which did not pass through because of apparently the resistance that it encountered. So it's not binding, it's very soft, but that's all we have at the moment to say that ICANN is also directly liable, not just the governments that participate in this setting. Because that's the gap that we have, especially for international organizations that are like ICANN, global organizations that enact global policy. And there is no way, you mention USA law. Okay, we can mention European law. We can mention any kind of laws, but then we encounter this resistance again on a different level. But we are a global organization, or we are, registered in America. We're not bound by European laws and things like that. So we're trying to find the consensus, which is perhaps stemming from a Universal Declaration of Human Rights and things that are very, very basic, in fact. So this has been articulated in a Ruggie Principles, and I don't say that Ruggie Principles is great. Actually, it's not. But that's the very limited thing we can start with, and I wouldn't say it's been designed just to address industry and business as coal mining, because Ruggie himself now wrote this report about FIFA, which is non-profit association setting global norms just like ICANN in football. Yeah? So it's very similar in many ways, and many private corporations are setting global standards and norms in their own areas and fields. For example, Shimano bike brakes, bicycle, braking gear. It's a global norms that they establish and everybody follows. So this is private making, and this is normal sort of situation in the neoliberal sort of era where we have private bodies establishing global norms, and we are trying to get certain constraints on them. So I think we're in agreement, and I don't think that we need to push from any sort of Ruggie principles. We don't need to say that this is inapplicable because they're both just complementary.
Thanks, Monica. Stephanie?
Thank you, Stephanie Perrin, for the record. I wanted to raise the issue of jurisdiction. Many of the problems with respect to data protection can be solved by the simple inclusion of the words subject to applicable law. The reality is that ICANN is not observing applicable law, and we have a very long history of ICANN figuring out ways to avoid applying privacy law. It gets more complicated when you include constitutional law that protects speech and due process and these other issues. But I would argue that it does apply. And while ICANN may be in California, the companies that have to conform to ICANN policy are usually not. So they are subject to applicable law. And while they are not states, some of this still applies under their jurisdictions. So I think a useful way of approaching this problem that and I apologize, I haven't got time to follow the human rights discussions in the cross-community working party because I'm more at the grassroots level on some of these privacy issue PDPs, of which there are many. But I think a useful way of approaching it is to sell a global practice based on the very real need to harmonize around applicable law. Because what happens normally is you raise the issue of applicable law and your adversaries throw up their hands and say, which law? Okay, you don't like that? Then let's adopt a norm. And we want a firm norm. We want something that is actionable. If we do come up with an with a human rights impact assessment, we are still stuck with the lack of specificity in terms of interpretation. And that is why I want to start a working group on this, because once we ask for the for the human rights impact assessment, we got to know what we want at the next phase, because it'll be high level. It has to be high level. It's not like we're Shimano making bike gears. We've got to get down to some grassroots on what that means. Thanks.
I just wanted to highlight in one sentence, the data protection and information privacy law, at least in Europe, but I guess also in US, is the primary and the only example of horizontal application of human rights. So it is directly applicable to private actors. And so maybe it's a good way to start, because that's the only horizontal application we have so far. All others are only applied vertically, as we discussed. So I think that's a sort of a good way to start doing this. But once again, you encounter the resistance by saying this is purely European invention and this is only applicable in Europe. And we could excuse the registrars by exempting them. So we need something that addresses the issue from the global perspective rather than just national law. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Monica. I guess it's maybe time to maybe stop here, and then we can resume the discussion in 45 minutes. So to continue more about, and then because we have the guests coming at 1:30, so what I am suggesting, let's reconvene at 1:50. We can continue the discussion if there is anything else. And so, is it clear? Okay. 1:15. Okay, so let's stop the recording here and just please inform the remote participants. Thanks. Hi everyone, we will resume the meeting in 1 or 2 minutes, so please take your seat and be ready. Okay, thanks everyone. So we will start now, and I think the record start. First, let me welcome Khaled Quba, who is the new ICANN board director appointed by the Noncom for the coming 3 years. And I want to thank him for accepting to join us. This is a good opportunity for the NCUC to discuss with him. I think we want to have kind of discussion and to maybe to know more what he wants to do in the board. I think also he's looking forward to listen from us. Maybe just to highlight that he is also from Tunisia, and don't worry guys, we are not taking over the ICANN. But Yeah, I know him for many years. We are a few people from Tunisia involved, but I was really happy to see that he is joining the ICANN board. So, Khalid, you want to say something first?
So, thank you, Rafiq. Thank you, everyone, to have me here with you. It's a privilege for me to be nominated in the ICANN Board of Directors. My name is Khalid Kouba. I'm from Tunisia, as my friend Rafiq said. For those who don't know me, I have a background from the civil society. I was the founder of the Internet Society chapter back in 2006. I participated in the WSIS process in Tunis. I had as mentors people from this table like Milton, like Matthew, a lot of other great friends. So I bring, in fact, to the board of directors a background of a young person. Obviously, I'm the youngest one in the board, which is a privilege for me. I think this is an important issue to bring youth and include them in our process. But I also bring a diversity of someone who is from Africa and believe in Africa. I'm also Arab and I believe in the Arab culture. I'm also a proud Muslim and I believe it's a religion of peace. I bring also a background of someone who lived in under the one of the most dangerous censorship regime, the previous regime in my country. It was a tough period for us, but we survived it, and obviously we are looking for a better situation for our countries. I think all this will allow me to tackle my responsibility as a board member to look at things differently, and obviously will help to include new spirit of respecting different principles of human rights and freedom of expression in a different way as possible, in fact. So what I want to say is that I will be always available at any time. For those who don't have my contact, I will be pleased to share it with you. I'm available online through different way of communication on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Whenever you feel better for you to communicate with me, I'm always available. Don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time, and I will be happy to engage with you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Khalid. Okay, let's see. If there are some question or comment. We just back from the lunch, so okay, so maybe first question, not question, I mean, so since now you joined the board, I think, and you had several meetings, well, what do you kind of see, maybe from your perspective as kind of the dynamic within the board, and how you see that you can help there, and maybe how you think that you can voice to be the voice of some concerns, maybe from civil society.
Thank you. In fact, I said to my colleague that I'm lucky to join the board at this moment because everything is somehow new for everyone. Over the transition, obviously there is a new bylaw, there is an implementation process that needs to kick off to make sure that all the transparency and accountability measures are implemented well. This is a big and important phase. We recently gained our freedom for sure, but when we say freedom, we have also some sort of responsibility to be at the level of what the end user is expected from us to be. This is one sort of principle in my mind to keep. I think I don't have any precise point to discuss with you, but I would be happy to answer any precise point. I saw that during the discussion that we had this morning about the issues like on the freedom on the human rights principles. The board is open for sure. We had discussed it internally, and we are looking to how we can tackle it in a clear way for us.
Thank you. This is Robin Gross for the record, and thanks very much for coming to our session. It's not very often we get board members come speak with us, so thank you. Thank you. So I'm just wondering what your own sort of personal priorities would be on the board. You know, what are sort of the changes or the areas that you want to focus in, or the kind of issues that you would like to see prioritized in the organization? Thanks.
Obviously, as I said, I mean, I bring a diversified background. I would like first internally inside the group of board of directors to make sure that this diversified background is impacted on them as well. So there is a lot of education and work together as a team of board internally to make them aware about my sensitivities. This is one point. The second point, at the community level, one of my big concern and one of my goal to achieve is to include more people, fresh blood, more participation, especially from young people, because I believe in giving more opportunity for youth, as I see them much more active today, much more responsible, much more aware about what's happening in the digital world. I think this is one of the issues. Obviously, the board will not be, responsible of executing it, but we will be able to give direction to the execution part of the organization to do that. Support to the community is also an important issue to raise and to make sure that there is enough support for everyone to be involved in the discussion and in the policy development. Those are priority things for me.
Yes.
Niels ten Hoover for the record. Thanks again for joining us, and I think we all definitely also very much appreciate more diversity in the board. And so the points that you just said around your priorities seem to focus around diversity, and secondly around outreach. So when we talk about diversity, that is still quite a large field, ranging from IDNs to how do we engage more gender diversity, geographical diversity, age distribution, experience distribution. So I would be very interested to hear more exactly how at what level you'd like to do that, and how you think we can best address that. Well, I personally also be very interested in how we get IDNs working with email. I think that's still a big hurdle we need to work on. And then when it comes to outreach and young people, I completely agree. I find it a very hard sell though for people who are young to spend their times on conference calls, on mailing lists, and in conference centers. You know, I think it's not a specifically very attractive selling mechanism. So I think we should always try. Trying is always good, but let's also see what can we offer and how should we do the work? Because I've been here now active for 1.5 years, and I only start to feeling comfortable now in the GNSO. You know, like, I'm not understanding every second word. So, but that's such an investment to ask for people, right? And the younger you are, a day can already be an eternity, and 1.5 years, you don't even want to think about that. So, what are your thoughts and strategies, tactics, and what would you like to give us for lessons, and how can we work with you on that?
So, I completely see that, because I was, experiencing it and living it for years now. And my two friends on this table from Tunisia, Rafiq and Ines, may be the result somehow of how much we were capable in Tunisia to at least have few of us. We are a small country with a limited number of citizens, but obviously we became active on the ICANN level, which is great for me to see persons like Ines, a young active person, became engaged. It's not easy. It's a learning process. It's a long and hard process to explain to people that it's a multi-stakeholder model. It's a merit-based. It's you need to show your work, and you need to share your knowledge so people can trust you and believe that you are capable to do work. It's not easy to, especially for us in countries in Africa and Middle East and Asia, to explain that, because we are not used to it. The process is education mainly, is outreach, is making effort, make yourself available. I myself, on my personal capacity, I did that for different reasons, different years. I don't see any specific project, but we can talk later on if you want on how we can do it. I personally am involved in my region on my capacity as the founder of the Arab World Internet Institute, which is mainly now working on that. One of the projects of our institute is to educate 1 million Arab internet users by 2020. It's a huge, and we are trying to do it because we believe that out of 140 million internet users in the Arab region, there is for sure people that will be active in different way, or at least engaged and informed internet user, which would be probably much better than we have today. To your point on the IDN, I can tell you that I just joined the board, and one of my obvious working group in the board was to join directly two of my most interested theme, which is the IDN working group and the Internet Governance working group. So I found myself naturally directed to those two working groups. On the IDN point, I can tell you that I was part of the Arabic script working group since 2009, 2010. We did a lot of work on that. There is a huge work to be done. I even before joining the board, I was for 4 years as a head of public policy and government relation at Google, and I was working with different people from my region to make sure that they have the contact and the right person to work with Google team and Gmail team to ensure that there is a universal acceptance between the emails. I personally have my own domain name in Arabic language. I'm trying as well to create my email in Arabic language. I'm getting some difficulty because my hosting provider is not really providing that, so I'm working on it, at least on my personal level, so I can do outreach to other people. And this leads to the discussion on how ICANN should tackle that. I think the IDN working group is doing a great job. We have a great team in ICANN. Sarmad is doing a great job on that, and I know he's having a good plan for that. So obviously I just joined it. I'm not yet, in fact, in the board, but I'm having as well priority for those two issues.
Thanks so much for that answer, and I do not want to monopolize the time, but I would be very curious to ask a follow-up question, and that is because of your interest and experience also with the Internet Governance Working Group. How do you see the sensitization and the acceptance of the multi-stakeholder model in the Arab region? And because we've seen at the WTSA, again, that the African group and the Arab group have been really strongly focusing on an expanding of the mission of the ITU-T specific and ITU at large. What could we do, or what is the developments? There like an increasing interest, decreasing interest, there's not much knowledge, and secondly, what could we do to improve the situation?
So my personal answer to that, without the hat of ICANN board member, I honestly think that things will go worst, and I think that the danger and the harm harmful proposals in a different way to some sort of harm or destroy the multi-stakeholder model, and the open internet will grow for different reasons. From a perspective of security, using the channel of the growth of terrorism and extremism and hate speech and all this, and use it as a channel to tackle the freedom of expression and the open internet. This is extremely going up. And also the fact that even the geopolitical situation, I mean, in my region is changing hugely. The fact that we are seeing distance growing between Saudi Arabia and the US is impacting that, because Saudi Arabia as country, and again, this is my personal position, it's not a board position. Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Arabic working group in the ITU space. So they are leading everything, along with other countries as well. And we have been seeing them since the plenipotentiary in South Korea, in different other area in ITU. I think there is a room to have it done differently than we are doing it now. And you guys, I think you need to work. I see on the table a huge diversity of people from different countries. The only way for me to tackle that is to take time and effort to do things on the local level, because the internet governance, it's not a global issue, it's a local issue. It needs to be resolved at the local level. It needs to be done through growing and empowering people on the local level so they can talk to their government, so they can identify who is in the government doing what with ITU or with other UN agencies, and be capable to at least identify any urgency or any issue or any upcoming threat, and get things done through his contact or his network or whatever initiatives he's with. This is capital for the work. Again, I say that the telecom sector has a home, which is the ITU. The internet does not have a home, in fact, somehow, because it's a mixture of different organizations that do a lot of different part of the work, which is make it an open and multi-stakeholder effort. And this is the weak part of us. Somehow we need to find a way to not create a home, but at least create a global effort, a common effort between those who are defending the open internet, and keep it up. I think it's a very important issue for me.
Hi, I'm Kathy Kleiman, and thank you. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for joining the board. What can we do to help you? There's a lot of background in this room on issues inside and outside of ICANN, on freedom of expression, on privacy, on fair use and fair dealing, on due process. A lot of diversity, as you pointed out. But what can we do to help you as you come onto the board, and then also it's an ongoing invitation as you start working on issues? Any thoughts? Or
when you say you mean me as board member, as person? Well, I mean, honestly, I'm open to discussion. I'm open to have your feedback at any time. This will be for sure a good way to help me, at least to raise my awareness about any issue that I'm not aware of, which is one of the most important element that we can work on. This is obviously will be helping me to at least do my work, being informed rather than not being informed. I don't see any other.
So I don't know how familiar you are. You probably are very familiar with the ICANN policies. But if you ever get to a point where you said, why did they do that? We can probably help. How did they make that error? We probably know how we stumbled into it in the policy development process. Thank you.
Thank you to be here with us. I'm Haoran from China. Actually, I'm a newcomer of the ICANN meeting, also a newcomer in NCUC because I just applied to join this NCUC. So really glad to be here and ask you about this question. Actually, I have two questions. First is about the new GTLD, and the next about the capacity building of the young people. So, firstly, if my question is naivety, please to receive my sincere apology. First question about the new GTLD. As we know, ICANN is a non-profit organization, and when new GTLD comes, there are some of these they are commercial users domain, and some of these are non-commercial user domain. As we know, maybe commercial users domain we will make some dividends to the registries, and also they maybe will come some of the benefit to ICANN, and also the non-commercial users domain maybe they also have some very important issues such as the privacy, also some morals issues. So how our ICANN board will keep this balance, and which could be the priority? This is the first question. And the second question is, as I have participated in some of the capacity building program, I have only know some of the basement of the fundamental knowledge of how ICANN operate, what is ICANN structures, what is ICANN organizations. But when I try to involve myself into ICANN, I do not know where to go. But luckily, some of the members of NCUC give me really good encouragement, such as Professor Milton, such as Casey. So I'm really lucky to be here. But I think ICANN should do is try to attract more young people's interest to join ICANN, not to be their professor, but to be not to be their professionals, but to be their interest to be here to try to involve themselves in. So this is my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and welcome, and thank you for making from your time to be here and to be involved with this. It's not obvious for anyone to understand how much is important the work in the ICANN community, because somehow we are impacting more than 3 billion internet users, and probably there will be 5 billion by a few years now. It's a huge responsibility. I personally, since 2005, I spend almost 2 to 3 hours per day, at least, if not more, to just reading all the mailing list I'm in, and try to be involved, and try to keep myself informed, and try to keep myself at least aware about what's going on here and there, and either at the ICANN space or outside. It's a huge demanding work. So without interest, without you being in love with this, and you have this personal capacity to provide yourself, your time, and dedicate yourself, you cannot do it. So this is the hard part of it, because educating people is easier, but make them dedicated to do the volunteer work is not easy to do. I think every one of us is capable to bring new people. For sure, the more responsibility, the more capacity you have, the more you are responsible to do. Someone in the board needs to do more than someone in other position, or just a fellow, or just a young participant. But someone who have been here for years, I think he's more responsible to do more. For your question about the domain names, so I think it's important for us to always keep in our mind that the way things happen in ICANN is that the policy related to everything is at the hand of the community. The board is here just to make sure that this policy is accepted and turned into form of a resolution that then executed by the ICANN staff and organization. This is very important for us to keep, because we cannot as board, play the role of the community and understand the need of the community and develop policies or intervene or whenever in any way. The only way for a board to intervene is that when you see a resolution or when you see a policy and you have sensitivities and you have background and you have will and you have interest in things, that you say, no, here I see problems. Return back and provide us with different other options, because obviously for us we cannot accept it as a policy. I hope I answered your question, but again, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time. It's very important for everyone. It's not easy, in fact, even for the outside world to understand that we are almost more than 2,000 persons, in the internet, in the ICANN community, doing the job for free almost. It's a huge asset for the internet. So thank you again.
Hi, so thanks so much for coming. I'm one of the two co-rapporteurs for the Workstream 2 subgroup that's looking at transparency. And one of the issues that we've heard brought up a lot is about expanding transparency among the board. And specifically, it's been proposed that the board should have similar transparency policies as the GNSO. So I wanted to ask, first of all, do you think that there is a need to expand transparency on the board? And do you have any ideas about areas that should be done? And specifically, what do you think about the policy proposal of having similar transparency provisions as you would find for the GNSO?
I can say that being not aware exactly about the Workstream 2 as of today, I cannot answer that part related to specific work of your subgroup, but I can assure you that within the days that I have been passing now here and the previous meeting with the board, I can assure you that the transparency is an important issue that we are taking into consideration for us. Transparency, on the level of the board. And the reaction I have been seeing from the other board members is very positive. It's very positive into more transparency. Because honestly, we need to consider ourselves as part of we are part of the community. Anyone need to be aware about anything about you, me, Milton, Rafiq, everything. We are obviously a transparent organization, and we need to keep that on every single level of our work. So I will not be able to go in depth, but the principle is here.
Okay. So Ines, I think it will be the last question, but yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Ines Hafaid from Tunisia, for the record. Thank you very much for coming. I really have not a question, but I'm always wondering why ICANN doesn't do anything on the ground to reach the young people. This is my feeling. It's not really reaching young people. The conferences and events are usually elitist. Me as a teacher, I really tried with the Tunisian government and some of my friends in internet governance and Tijani, for example, and many were welcoming and they were ready to come to my school and to give, because it's really important. And Tunisian people and Arabs, young people, they really don't feel the importance of internet governance. But it's still from a personal incentive and a personal readiness to help. What can ICANN do on the ground to reach those young people? Thank you very much.
So first of all, I think you have benefited of one of the program that was sponsored by the ICANN, which is great.
Yeah, but to act as a multiplier, I need some support.
I completely...
Not financial, but strategy. Thank you.
I completely agree, and this was my second part of the answer. So, I cannot say more than you just said. We need multipliers effect, for sure. But bear in mind that when we ask ourselves the question, do we need to educate the 3 billion internet users about us? I don't think so. Probably we need to make sure that we are transparent and available and open enough so anyone, even it's not educated person about us, can go in and educate himself by himself. This is first. We keep ourselves open at the maximum. In terms of outreach, we can do targeted actions to different segment of the users, based on the fact that we need more diversity to include women, more diversity to include youth, more diversity to include people from Africa. This is where we need exactly to focus on. For sure, a way to get people from Africa involved with us, or from Tunisia, or from any other developing country, need to take more resources, more attention from us. Which is, in fact, at the executive level, I think they are doing their job, but we will make sure that at the board level there is enough attention to that. And this is part of the community support discussion that we have as well. Okay, thanks, Khaled, for participating with us and trying to respond to so many questions. And we are looking forward that we keep, this communication and trying to give feedback and so on. So thanks again. Thanks. Okay, so we will try now to move to resume the discussion about several topics we had. I think Niels left, so probably we cannot go into discussion about human rights, but let's go to one of the subgroup in work stream 2, which is about transparency, surprisingly. And Michael, who is here, will try to give us a brief about what's going on in that subgroup. I think you already delivered some initial report or something like that. Yeah, please go ahead.
So thanks for that. Loud. Mike Kernickless for the record, one of 2 co-rapporteurs for the transparency subgroup. So we have engaged in a consultation through the cross-community working group for anybody that had any ideas about how to improve transparency. The focus of the subgroup was on 4 major themes. The first was improving the DIDP. The second was transparency of ICANN's interactions with governments. The third is transparency of board deliberations, or of board more generally, as you just heard. And then the fourth one was ICANN's whistleblower protection policy. So we basically started the process with an open consultation, inviting feedback from the members, and we got some great ideas as a result of that. And we've processed that into a draft paper, which has been circulated around, I guess the NCUC has, I think it's been circulated around to the NCUC. But anyway, I think it's available if people want to see it. And that's going to be, we're currently in the process of reworking that into a paper for distribution to the plenary for feedback, which hopefully will be done later this week. So in the meantime, just for those of you who haven't been exposed to the paper or haven't been at any of the previous discussions of it, we're basically proceeding from the perspective that transparency is extremely important for ICANN and that a lot more needs to be done, and there needs to be significant improvements to ICANN's transparency policies in order for it to enable it to fulfill its function. The whole point of like a multi-stakeholder body is about consultation, and it's about ensuring that everybody has input into decision making that happens at ICANN. And in order for that to work, the community needs to have accurate information about what's going on. They need to be able to get a clear picture. So, transparency is fundamental to making this decision-making process work in order to ensure that people are making these decisions and feeding in their inputs from a perspective of understanding and from a perspective of having an accurate picture of what's going on. So from that perspective, we got a lot of very useful feedback from people in the community, a lot of whom have had their own frustrations in using the DIDP specifically and in not being able to obtain clear information or timely information about what's going on. There was a lot of complaints about overbroad application of exceptions, and so that led us to to publish a list of suggested revisions to the DIDP, including narrowing the exceptions, tightening the timeline, having better procedures for access, which I'm very happy to go into detail on. So basically what I was hoping to do here as part of this conversation was first of all to make another sort of plea for any feedback or ideas that people have, because we're just in the final stages of processing this into a report that's going to be circulated or revising the report that we had. So if anybody has specific areas of improvement or specific inputs, and we're very welcome to get them. But beyond that, I was hoping to just sort of open a chat about whether people are supportive of this process and what people think are best avenues towards impacting change should be once the recommendations have been finalized. So I'm not sure if that's enough of an introduction or if people want me to sort of go into more detail about the recommendations that we have thus far. I'm happy to do so. But for now, I'd like to just sort of open it up and see if people want to contribute.
Thanks, Michael. And I think Stephanie?
Stephanie Perrin for the record, and I apologize for not having examined any documents that you've circulated so far. It's slipped under the radar for me. My question is, how did you deal with the issue of who actually makes the decisions in terms of the refusal to release or the exemptions applied?
So that's an area that is currently vague according to the DIDP and needs to be clarified. One of the major problems with the DIDP that we isolated is a total lack of enumerated process around what happens when the request comes in. There was a previous complaint, I think it was by Ed Morris, to the board review process, where he complained about a lack of clarity in the system, and they responded by releasing this PDF that says how we do it. And it was, again, super vague. All it really says is, well, the request comes in, and then we think about it, and then we put out an answer. Without really mentioning who's making the decisions, what kind of factors are being considered, how are consultations done, etc. So we are recommending, the recommendations that we have right now push towards clarifying that quite a bit more. First and foremost, we would want a single contact point to be the person who responds to DIDP requests. Again, this is a hallmark of strong access to information systems both at the governmental level and among intergovernmental bodies. You have to have somebody whose responsibility is as the contact point for where the requests come in, so that people, first of all, know who to send them. Right now, it's just a broad email address. It's just a DIDP at ICANN, I think, is the email address. You need to have a single person so that you can get information from them and get a clear idea of who's responsible for the processing. Now, this person is going to need to consult with other people within ICANN. So, for example, if you're requesting information that is related to root servers and there's concern about whether the disclosure of it would be harmful to security at ICANN, to the stability of the internet, then you need to talk to the people within ICANN that have the expertise on that. So you're going to need consultations. It's not going to be a one-stop shop, but there should be one person with a targeted responsibility there. In terms of the factors as well, there's a lot of vagueness around that. And so more broadly, we're looking at a clearer statement of what exceptions are there and a clearer statement of how the public interest test is meant to be applied and what factors should be considered.
If I could respond to that, Stephanie Perrin. That's great. And in the process of this, can we figure out an oversight model that works? One of the concerns I have about ICANN when it comes up with these officers and systems is that they use the U.S. system. And as you know, the U.S. Access to Information System, in order to appeal a decision, you have to go to court. Other jurisdictions have used the Information Commissioner model, which has an independent ombuds person, sometimes with binding powers, that can intervene on the decision. I think it'd be really good if we made sure that, A, the information officer, who I'll call a FOIA coordinator for lack of a better word, reports somewhere else. Under the librarian would be good. Make it the librarian. I don't know how busy the librarian is, but somewhere so that it's not under that complaints officer, unless we're really happy with how that complaints office gets set up, and I think the jury's still out on that one. And they could also appeal perhaps to the outside counsel for a review of the decision, because right now the review of this decision is done by the board, I believe, and that doesn't usually work out well for us. Thanks.
Yeah, the current model for review is completely substandard and needs to be overhauled. You mentioned that the U.S. model is problematic. I completely agree with that. Obviously, the U.S. model of access to information is generally not one that we stress that either organizations or countries should follow. We had a good discussion about this on November 2nd in the cross-community working group meeting before this event started. And it was really interesting that from that perspective, we were hearing a lot from Indian representatives. And I was almost thinking, like, this is so great. We almost have home field advantage because the Indian system is particularly robust in terms of oversight and in terms of generally providing for a proper right to information. So it was great to be having that discussion here and to be getting so many inputs from that perspective that emphasize the need for a strong transparency model. In terms of the specific way in which it's reviewed, obviously reviewing it to the board is a broken system. We've been stepping a little bit lightly at the moment around suggesting changes to the review model because currently that's another process that's being done, and I think that review of DIDP request is currently going to be part of the IRP model that's being advanced. That's my understanding of it. And so from that perspective, I've been a little bit wary of sort of our subgroup charging into that when there is an ongoing discussion that another subgroup is taking forward. And also, so because that seems to be being handled by a different process, we've been a little bit wary of sort of asserting that, obviously, even though that's critical to the effectiveness of the transparency systems, the fact that somebody else is dealing with this so directly, I think leads to a little bit of reticence to charge in as part of our mandate. But I certainly think that some broad values can be included, such as ensuring that the process is independent, which the IRP clue is in the name, seems to be, and also that it should be managed by somebody that has a broader understanding of transparency or some relevant expertise in transparency and the right to information, which I'm not sure is necessarily in the IRP right now, but that without providing concrete recommendations, I think that's something that we could explore a little bit just as broader values.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Matt?
Matthew Shears. Apologies, I haven't read the report either. But how are you proposing to, or how is the working group proposing to bring greater transparency to ICANN's interaction with governments?
So that's something that's still being developed a little bit. The section on DIDP is quite a bit more developed at the moment, but the main focus thus far has been on lobbying transparency. And that was also handled, I should say, by my co-rapporteur, Chris Wilson, as opposed to me. But I can tell you what the recommendations are. Where at the moment, Sorry, let me just bring it up. At the moment, he's suggesting that ICANN should begin disclosing publicly on at least a yearly but no more than a quarterly basis all expenditures on an itemized basis by ICANN for outside contractors and internal personnel devoted to political activities, and all identities of those engaging in such activities, both internal and external, on behalf of ICANN, as well as the type of engagement used for such activities, to whom the engagement and supporting materials are targeted, and the topics discussed with relative specificity. Those are the recommendations we have at the moment. The changes to the DIDP will also impact this because this is a question of proactive disclosure and the information that goes out automatically. The DIDP is a request-based system, but it's fundamentally the structure of what stays classified and what is release. So generally speaking, we were currently thinking about retaining an exception for information whose disclosure would harm ICANN's relationship with foreign governments or harm the deliberative process. I mean, if you have ideas about narrowing that down further, I'd be very open to it. It'd be great to hear it. But generally speaking, that's where we are at the moment, and we're open to inputs.
To see if there is any further comment or question here. Okay, so thanks, Michael. Any action required from our side or from NCUC, NCNG?
No, so just to review on the next steps. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback both at the session that we had last week and in the meantime, people have sort of approached us and sent us more info, which is great. And, it's a member-driven process, so we always want to hear more. And we're currently in the process of redrafting the current report in order to factor in this additional feedback that we've gotten, and we're hoping to circulate to the plenary later this week. So that's where we stand. So in terms of future interaction, send us more ideas and hopefully, just participate in the process.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, Niels.
Not so much a question, but more a comment. And it's I would really like to commend Michael and CLD for coming into ICANN, guns blazing and making this happen, where it took for me just such a long time to get acquainted. You came in, used your expertise, and been doing it for the right fight. So that is, I think that's worth an applause.
Thanks, Niels. Okay, so if we don't have any further comment on this, so let me see. So how much we still have? We have around 40 minutes in this session. Niels, just to be sure, we don't have we don't need to elaborate more about human rights issue.
We can always elaborate, but I think there is a demand. So we have enough supply. But the question is there more demand? I think we've discussed at length with people who had issues. If people have more issues, I'm happy to discuss more, but I'm not going to flood the market.
Okay, thanks. So checking the agenda, I think we did most of the topics. Oh, okay. So I put as an item the GNSO future, but I'm not sure if we really know to go through it again. Myself, I didn't attend the session in Wednesday, but my understanding that we are not comfortable with what was proposed at that time, and if there is no interest, we can move just to the administrative matters. Tapani wants to say something.
Yeah, okay, Tapani Tarvani for the record. For the GNSO futures really was basically buried at that point, and so I don't think there's need to talk about that much unless and until it rises from its grave again.
Okay, when it will be the Walking Dead GNSO futures episode. Okay. So we can then move to the administrative matters. So we put several items. I would prefer to start first with the election update. So as probably most of you are aware, we started the nomination process. We got several candidates. We encourage more to come and to be nominated. So the nomination period is last till I think, till this Sunday. So if you know a prospective candidate, you can encourage him or her to run either for the chair position or for one of the 5 seat for the regional representative and executive committee, and maybe just for those newcomer. With that, just to clarify, at NCUC, so we elect the chair and also elect the executive committee, and we have 1 representative by region, which ensure the diversity at some level in the executive committee. So this is quick update on the election. Milton, do you want to add something? Or? Yeah. About the election. Yes.
I'm not really.
Okay, thanks. So we will move quickly to the Tapani.
Tapani Talan again. I just want to add to what Rafik said, that do nominate as many people as possible. We want a real election, not just a few candidates, and consider self-nominating. Losing is not a shame here. Come on. Think of regular parliamentary elections. You generally lose like 10 times before you get elected. So keep running, keep showing yourself, self-nominate.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I mean, that's the idea. It's really to encourage people to run. I think some of you went through that and we lost election. It doesn't hurt that much, trust me. So, you can overcome it. So so the process is ongoing, and also in term, remembered, in term of the check-in process, basically we are doing the check-in for the new members, and also for those who didn't check in the NCSG election. So, it's quite important for us because for this time we are also voting for the bylaws change, and this is an item to be presented by Milton. So we need really a good turnout to get the bylaw change approved. So let's move to that item, Milton.
Okay, so the NCUC bylaws were written basically at the inception of the NCUC. Then they were, when it was named something else, then it was updated a little bit when we created the stakeholder group structure, but there was all kinds of problems with it. For example, when we created the non-commercial stakeholders group, sometimes there were contradictions between elements of the NCUC bylaws and the NCSG bylaws. So what we've known for several years that we needed to revise and reform these bylaws, and we simply never got around to doing it until the current STAR EC group, led by Rafik Dynamic, decided to actually get down and get this done. So we have a draft, and it has been circulated, and some of you have commented on it. And basically what we're doing now is we think we have reconciled most of the issues. We are going to be asking, is this correct, Rafa? We will be asking for another round of comments, or just for people to express their general support at this stage? Because it will have to go on a ballot, and it will have to be voted on by a substantial number of the members in order to be successful at amending these bylaws.
Thanks, Milton. We had the first consultation, and then we try to resolve all the questions and issues that happen. And then we started another round of consultation, and we will have a meeting about the bylaws discussion this Tuesday at 13:45. In which room? Let me see. So we will have a dedicated meeting to discuss about the bylaws and to go through some open issue. And after that, we will have, the kind of new version, and we see if there is any objection. And after that, the executive committee will approve it and put it for the voting. In terms of the process, we are going to extend the consultation period by 1 week because to align it with the election timeline. So that give us more time to discuss any open issues.
Okay, so yes. Mariam, this is where we invoke the gods. We say, Mariam, can you put the slide for the bylaw changes up on the screen? Oh, it's Aiden's. Who said he's not a god?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm not sure I can recall what bylaw says about the nomination and the process, but I was to ask whether is somebody from one region can nominate someone in another region where they does not come from?
Yes, the regional representatives can be nominated from anywhere, and people from all regions vote for them. Which that was a deliberate decision that we made a long time ago in order to have a more cohesive executive committee, one that represents, you want the person to be from the region, but you want them to represent, in some ways, all of the constituency. So again, the slides should be up. Yes. You'll have to use a microphone if you expect me to hear you.
Sorry, Renata. His question is if can someone represent a region not being from there?
No. As I said, you have to be from the region. You have to be from that region, but you basically have to seek support from the entire constituency. Well, let's not get stuck on a particular issue now. Let me go through she has the entire bylaws up there. We have some slides here about the changes that were made, where we had the issues that were raised and how they were resolved. Doesn't have them. Yeah, okay. All right, so let's start with that slide number 4, which is going through the issues list and resolution. Yes. So one of them was one of the changes we made deals with membership eligibility. Some of you remember we had a controversy about that. We had an executive committee member who was an employee of a registry and was working on behalf of the registries in some of the working groups, and we have gone through this issue, and we wanted there was an ambiguity in the policy, and so we tried to reconcile this by making it clearer. So Article 3, Section A5 requires membership-based organizations to not only be non-commercial itself, but have a primarily non-commercial focus. And the membership should also be primarily composed of non-commercial members. And what we mean by that is we don't want chambers of commerce or industry trade associations to be eligible for membership in this constituency. They would be properly within the commercial stakeholders group because they're advancing commercial interests. One person commented they don't understand the extent of this restriction, and raised some issues about that. For example, what about IEEE, which is a professional organization and not explicitly profit or non-profit in focus? I would say that it depends on the purpose of the organization, and we think we have adequately resolved that in the current language. It should have primarily non-commercial focus. For example, one could say that IEEE is primarily concerned about education, and even though many of its members are companies or employees of commercial companies, they are probably eligible for NCUC. Yes, question. Niels?
Thank you very much, Dr. Muller. I do not necessarily see how this change would have prevented the incident that you described earlier, because I think the person you mentioned was not a organizational member of the NCUC, but an individual member. So I do not see how this would prevent that.
Yeah, there was another change that we made that does explicitly address that, and I think it's not in this list of slides because, I'll see if it is. It's not in this list of slides because nobody commented about it or challenged it.
Okay, to clarify here, it's the opening question, and this doesn't concern that issue. So this is more to clarify about the case of organization and that how we define eligible that they are non-commercial. Yes, Robin.
I'm just wondering if you could clarify what change would be made with respect to the individual memberships to try to address this problem.
What we did with individual memberships was we tried to clarify people who are employees of a company. I think that the main issue is whether they are, well, let me see if I can bring up the bylaw itself. Is that possible?
So the link is also in the Adobe Connect room if you'd like to see it on your device.
I'm looking still. Membership, eligible organizations. Yeah.
Just actually reading the eligible individuals in the proposal, and this is rather a bit surprising text. Natural persons who are active individual members of the NCSG, as defined by the NCSG. Does that mean that every member who fails to check in at the NCSG election process will be automatically instantly kicked out of NCUC? Because that it seemed to imply.
No. Here, just to
Can you tell us what article and section you're reading from? That will help everybody get on the same page.
I'm reading this proposal membership. I lost it already. This is not well numbered here.
Membership is
eligible individuals.
Membership is Article 3.
Yes, then item I.
Section I.
Yes,
Okay.
eligible individuals.
National persons who are active individual members of the NCSG as defined by NCSG and who meet the following criteria are eligible for individual membership. So you're saying that when we're holding elections, we send out this registration, and people who don't respond are deemed inactive?
They will be classified as passive according to NCSG charter. They are no longer active members in that definition.
Okay.
So I think this is rather radical change if you read it that way. But
it's probably an oversight. It's not.
No, I mean, it's because the question was raised. I see the comment, and it was trying to resolve that. You raised that question before in the document. But I think here is when they try to join that they should be active already in the NCAG. This is how they are eligible to join NCUC.
Right, but I think I agree with Tapani that we don't need the word active.
Okay.
I think the word active was because there was a risk of becoming a zombie, like having many zombie people. And because there was the minimum of amount of people who are members to need to change the bylaws, for example, we can't have that, right?
Yeah, but then the NCSG definition of active does not really work well, at least not in the same saying that it's requirement for eligibility. For me, that implies that they will be fired instantly when they are no longer active.
Again, so because that was the response, not to be pedantic here, and trying to read what Farzana added as a comment, so as defined by NCSG, but also have defined in NCSC bylaws as active member who have responded to check-in. So we can ask her maybe for more details about this, what she resolved. But here I can understand this is when those who need to join, they need to be active first. But maybe it's to be kind of to enforce that, but we can clarify.
Yeah, it has another implication that the current process of joining would not work because we usually approve NCSG members and then you immediately approve them in the NCUC as well. So would you want to expect that they will become active in NCSG before approving them into NCUC?
Once you accept them as members, they're active until proven inactive, right? So anyway, the way we got into this, and I'll get to you, Stephanie, was that we were talking about the eligibility dispute that we had over the executive committee, and I was just going to tell you how we modified the language. What you want to say should come before that, Stephanie? Or would it be appropriate to say it afterwards?
I wanted to put in a little discussion on this whole zombie thing.
Okay, then let that wait.
Right.
Okay, so we are in Article 3, Section I, number 1, where we're talking about the criteria for eligible individuals. So we added a reference to an employer, as well as through membership in another supporting organization or GNSO stakeholder group. We added language: representatives of GAC or those working for a state-supported TLD registry operator cannot join NCUC as individual members. Those employed in government departments and intergovernmental organizations not involved directly in ICANN-related work may be eligible to join at NCUC EC discretion. So we've had a few people from governments who, some of them I think are double-dipping. They are GAC members or associated with GAC representation, and then they want to join NCUC. Others are just people who are interested in domain name issues, and they happen to work for the government. So we tried to distinguish between those two things. Yeah.
Matthew Shears Milton, sorry, just a clarification. You say those employed in government departments and intergovernmental organizations not involved directly in ICANN-related work may be eligible to join the NCUC discretion. What kind of individuals are you thinking about there? I mean, are we talking about...
Suppose there's somebody that works for the Environmental Protection Agency, and they just are a domain name hobbyist, or they have their own domain name, and they get interested in ICANN.
You don't think they could be conflicted at some point in time? Or if they are, then they have to declare that they would be, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, if they start talking about the EPA is demanding special name protections, then yeah, we would have to think about something like that.
I'm still thinking of a little example of someone who works at some government organization and manages as the host master for their little domain and has that kind of becomes interested in DNS. Would that disqualify them from NCUC even if the organization has no direct connection there? Okay, but this is just a borderline case, and I think we can leave this to the actual discussion.
Okay, guys. I mean, this is the thing. We are trying here to clarify, to not exclude, but also to create some criteria. I'm not sure how much deep we can go into details at this level in the charter. This text was added really to that we cannot accept, for example, someone he's a representative of a government in the GAG. I don't think he should be active in NCUC. But another way, there are many individuals, they may working for government agency and so on, but they don't deal with ICANN directly, so we may accept them. So we are trying here to create some balance, but I'm not sure how much we can add more and more text, because it can be sometimes really conflicting. So we need to be balanced here. Okay, yes.
Right. I think the thing to emphasize here is that in the last year, a lot of people have gone over these bylaws, and at this stage of the game, we've gone through a round of comment and modifications based on your comments, and fundamentally, unless you catch something that is a serious problem, and this sort of active-inactive might be the kind of thing, but this is not the time for rethinking entire sections of the bylaws. It's the time to, make the amendments. And if something about these bylaws you think is so horrible that you can't vote to amend it, then by all means you can vote against it. But otherwise, we really need to update this. We have problems and ambiguities in our bylaws that need to be fixed. And we have voting thresholds that have to be reached. So I hope that we will, get this finished and get it in place, and then move on with other more interesting business.
You were going through the slides with the most important changes, right, Milton? Or
you want me to keep doing that, don't you?
Well, let's do it thoroughly, right? These are the bylaws. Let them be done with it for the coming 2 decades, right?
You can clearly read this clear, large text, can't you?
But this is all.
Yeah. Well, no, that's only number...
Yeah, so let's do them.
Okay.
I mean, just maybe to clarify, I mean, we have also a whole session about the bylaws, but we are...
So you bylaw mavens can sharpen your teeth and your tools and start going through the text in that special session, right? Okay. So in the meantime, just trust me. We did everything right. Nothing to worry about here. Nothing could possibly go wrong. And what's next on the agenda, Chairman Rafiq?
Is now the time I get to talk about the zombie thing?
You're always talking about zombies.
No, I'm
Halloween
not.
was 5 days ago.
Okay, so I really think, Stephanie Barron for the record, I really think we should have a bit of a discussion because we have how many members now? 500? More?
I think more than 500. Yeah.
More than 500 members. But, and this is not just me whining about how I need help on the PDPs that I'm on, although I do. But I think that, those who've been following the discussions today will appreciate the complexity of the work that we're involved in and the number of horizontal links and the need to be constantly checking backwards and forwards and sideways to try to keep up with what's going on here. I'm a bit concerned that when it comes to voting in officers, a vote's a vote, and don't get me wrong, I don't believe in democracy, but we don't even. I mean, I don't believe in democracy. Although after the U.S. election, I may change my views, but go back to oligarchy. I'm concerned.
Exactly. We'll keep that in the transcript, Stephanie. So.
Yeah. For those not in the room, Avery has just put on her very fetching hat that says, "Make ICANN great again." Yes, it's a red hat, yeah. Anyway, is there not some way that we could have some kind of tiered membership? There's a lot of people who want to follow what we're doing here and keep an eye on what's going on in internet governance at ICANN, but who really never will have time to participate. And that is absolutely fine. But when it comes to, say, a crucial election where we're about to go into a knockdown, drag-out war on rights protection measures or I would be concerned if suddenly out of the ranks of our membership who have never come to ICANN or participated in a working group, suddenly a candidate came from nowhere. And there's no parallel here with the U.S. elections, even though we stumbled into that. Suddenly a candidate came from nowhere who had no grasp on the issues, who replaced, or 3 candidates or 5, whatever, replaced the people that have been working on the issues. That would be a worry. And I realize it's a remote possibility, but it is a possibility.
Yes, but that's precisely what the active membership prevents. If all of these people are sitting there.
All they have to do is check in, Milton. That's not a high threshold. That's certainly not like spending hours a week on PDPs.
Stephanie, it is a high threshold if in fact they're zombies.
But I'm not worried about zombies, and it's an unfortunate term perhaps. I'm worried about our capacity to be overruled after years of work and making progress.
First of all, we don't have elections about policies. We have elections about people, mostly. We don't have votes on what position we're taking in PDP 11. We have votes about who's going to be the chair and who's going to be on the executive committee. So that's actually not, I think, a substantive concern. If you're worried about somebody trying to stack the deck, we have a bylaw provision about people from the same organization. We have all of these eligibility requirements that are trying to filter out people who are stalking horses for other stakeholder groups. And I think our biggest problem is getting people to even vote and remain active, not with stopping them from voting. So I think you don't have to worry about that. You've got enough to worry about.
My intervention on this is not about today's problem. It's about risk assessment, about future problems. And I still think it stands. And I still think, I think we should actually make our candidates be much more clear about their positions on things so that people could have real choices. Thanks.
Then the issue is, do we have candidates more than it is, some zombie candidate rising from the grave and taking over your PDP working group?
No. I'm more concerned about them stacking the council and voting it down. Thanks.
Chairman, a certain order.
Yes, starting with you, Milton. Yeah, I mean, I don't see this as a real risk. For us, I mean, if you are talking more about policy and voting, yeah, I think you are talking about the NCSG level. It's not NCUC. And at the end, for NCUC and for the executive committee, one of our roles is to engage the member, and we have to do maybe much more and to get more people involved. But there is some reality that we cannot, I think, be it against the Pareto ratio, that we are not going to get all the hundreds of members to be active. If we have most of them following the discussion, that's enough. So to be honest, I don't see the risk, and I don't really believe to create this tiered membership or something. I think it will be really exclusive, and it will be more risk for me than anything else. So I kind of disagree with this vision that you may have, but it's not at NCUC level for now. We don't elect people for policy discussion. Robin, you want to add something? Okay. Do we want to? I guess we will have a whole session about the bylaws, and I think it will be really helpful. Hayden, can you share please the link of the charter? It will be really helpful if you go through the document and you put comment. And please, when you put comment, suggest some wording, because what would happen that we have like a question and we spend that time to figure out what the best answer. If you see some issues, it's better to provide like phrasing or wording that help us to resolve the issue. And so the meeting, it will be on Tuesday, 90 minutes of bylaws discussion, and that I know that excites everyone here. But we need to get this done and move on. The bylaws need to be changed for a long time. It's a good opportunity to fix this and move on. So with regard to other updates, since we have only 8 minutes and we'll have really short time before starting the NCSG session at 5:15. So, and I know people, they have to get their caffeine and so on. I want that maybe just to give quick update about the intersessional meeting, but those who were in the morning meeting between NCIG and CIG, we're still kind of trying to figure out should not have the session, and also to work more about the agenda. For me personally, it won't be any problem anymore. After the 5th December, someone else will have to care about this issue, since I'm not going to be chair anymore. But what I can say that let's have the intersessional for next year. I still believe that it's really better to get it with the meeting in Johannesburg. Don't believe it's a really good idea that people traveling and so on, but depends what maybe the next executive committee will decide on that matter, depending on the discussion with the membership. Other than that, we have a high interest topic session at 5 p.m. Is the DNS and content regulation. It will be in Hall 3. Unfortunately, it's overlapping with the NCSG. That's just as disclaimer. Don't blame Tapani, neither me. It's really we had to spend so much time regarding the scheduling. This meeting was kind of saying it was a nightmare. That's a huge understatement. The way how the schedule was designed, it makes it really difficult. Hopefully for the next meeting we can improve things. So please don't blame anyone. We have to live with what we get. So I know that we have this overlap, but if we can, for those interested by the topic, please come. We are trying to do this kind of cross-community session. Unfortunately, other high interest topic session are not that inclusive. while, for example, for NCUC session, we invited the registrar, registries, business constituency, the intellectual property constituency, and law enforcement agency. My attempt to get NCUC involved in others 2 sessions at least were kind of rejected. So this is maybe an issue for future to discuss in how we handle those high interest topic that sound that not kind of inclusive. That's what I want to say. Yes, Stefani. Yeah, please.
Just a few words pointing out that first, in the sessional, if we have time and people still around at the end of the NCSG session, I will talk about that in the AOB. I have some ideas about that. And second, that the bylaws session overlaps the NCSG Executive Committee meeting, so I may not be there, I'm afraid. But as Rafik said, this schedule has been serious. Well, no polite words toward him, so I'll leave it at that.
We are on the AOB. With your permission, can I be allowed to talk while standing here in front of you people? Please. I wanted to talk without microphone, but I think it is mandatory for us to be audible enough. The reason why I have stood in front of you people, it is because most of us don't know each other, though we are in the same business. And like on myself, I'm a slow runner. I have been in this business for quite some time now. I have been with you, most of you at market. I mean, with you here now, and we have been with you, almost everybody online. And I thought we are doing a commendable job. And with this, I decided I will, because we have an outgoing committee on NCUC, and we have also the NCSG and Tapani's leadership. On my side, I thought it's wise to commend both committees for the good work they have done and they are continuing doing. And with this, and with all due respect, okay, thank you. I request to be allowed to hand over some small token of appreciation to the leadership of the both NCSG and NCUC, and several other friends with me here, including I have not met Marcel this time round. I don't know whether we are still with him in this conference, and some other few friends. I want the chairman Tapani and Rafik to read me in announcing the names as I hand over whatever I have to the leadership. Please, if accepted. I was not aware of, and until when I discussed with my chairman here, is that we don't have a physical office anywhere in the world, and that is I asked him to make it an agenda item so that we can discuss on how we can have physical offices wherever we have the elected officials. But that is a matter of discussion. I think we can work on that and see what can be done into that regards. On that matter, I had carried some item to be kept in our office, wherever physical office we had. But since we don't have that physical office, let us start with handing over the physical item to the current chairs, so that they can know what to do with that item later on. This was meant for the NCUC. You remember? Yes. Thank you. Yes. Okay. We got a mascot finally, so. And then we have this for the NTSB. No insinuation. Yes. No, the name. I don't know whether we start with the ladies first or yes. Okay. Thanks, James. But just because I think in 15 minutes, so just we need to close the meeting and so on when we can. But just okay. Thanks everyone for joining, and really thanks James for this effort. You really didn't do that, but really appreciate it. And just for information, I think in the beginning, and when was Avri as a chair, we got before the turco, the elephant for NCUC. Yes, so yes, Yep. So it's really nice to bring this. So thanks everyone for joining. As you can see that we are quite diverse group, and we welcome everyone to join us and to get involved. Thanks again. And so let's stop the